The gunman raised his weapon as Adrian pulled his fake fiancée behind him. Elena Brooks had barely touched the champagne glass when the room changed. 1 second, golden chandelier light shimmered across crystal and polished walnut. The next, every conversation died beneath the sharp scrape of a chair. Adrian Moretti stood at the center of the private dining room, one hand gripping Elena's wrist, the other pressed against the back of her chair. His black suit was perfectly still, his expression unreadable beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers. Elena could smell champagne and expensive cedar from the polished walls. She looked past his shoulder and saw 3 unfamiliar men near the entrance. One wore a dark overcoat despite the heated room. Another had already locked the door. "Stay behind me," Adrian said quietly. Elena's fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. "You said this was dinner." "It was." His eyes never left the men. "Now it's something else." Only 3 days earlier, Elena had been carrying coffee between crowded tables at a restaurant in Manhattan, counting every dollar in her tip envelope before the shift ended. She owned 2 pairs of work shoes, rented a small apartment in Queens, and had never imagined stepping inside a room where 1 bottle of wine cost more than her monthly rent. Adrian had changed that with one impossible sentence. "I need you to pretend you're my fiancé." She had stared at him across the dark leather desk in his penthouse office, convinced she had misunderstood. He had not smiled. He had simply slid a diamond ring across the desk. 30 days, he said. You play the part. You attend a few dinners. You stand beside me when people expect to see a woman beside me. In return, I'll pay you enough to walk away from every bill you have. Elena had looked at the ring but never touched it. Why me? Adrian's jaw had shifted slightly. Because no one knows you. That answer had sounded simple. It wasn't. Now, beneath the chandelier, Elena understood exactly how serious the arrangement had become. Adrian's fingers remained around her wrist, firm but careful, while the room seemed to shrink around them. She's not part of this, one of the men said. Adrian finally looked at him. She is now. Elena's breath caught. Those 3 words were not part of their agreement. Neither was the way Adrian stepped closer, placing himself completely between her and the strangers. He had hired her to look like his fiancée. He had never promised to protect her, yet he was doing exactly that. Adrian, Elena whispered. What's happening? His gaze flicked toward the diamond on her finger. They're here because they believe you're important to me. But I'm not. For the first time that night, something moved behind his eyes. That's what they believed yesterday. A phone vibrated on the table. Adrian glanced at the screen, and the color of his expression hardened. Then he looked directly at Elena. From this moment on, don't leave my side. She swallowed and nodded. Adrian reached for her hand, closing his fingers around hers as the locked doors behind them clicked once more. The fake engagement had just become real protection, and Elena was about to discover why his enemies had come for her. SUA 3 days before the locked dining room, Elena Brooks had been counting crumpled bills beneath the yellow light of her kitchen ceiling when Adrian Moretti's offer arrived. Her apartment was barely large enough for the narrow table, the humming refrigerator, and the second-hand chair where she sat in her work uniform after midnight. The radiator clicked against the cold pipes. Coffee grounds and detergent lingered in the air. She spread her tips across the table, separating ones from fives, then stared at the overdue notice beside them. The numbers did not change. Neither did the balance. Her rent was due Friday, and she was already short by $640. At 7 the next morning, she would return to the Manhattan restaurant where she worked 10-hour shifts carrying plates through rooms lined with brass, glass, and dark wood. She had learned how to disappear there, head lowered, steps quiet, smile ready whenever a customer snapped his fingers. Then Adrian Moretti had walked into her life. He had arrived just before closing in a charcoal coat, accompanied by 2 silent men who waited near the entrance while he took the corner table. Elena remembered the scent of rain on his coat and the soft clink of ice against a glass. He had watched her work without saying a word. When the restaurant emptied, he left a black business card beside the untouched coffee. "Mr. Moretti wants to speak with you," one of his men had said. Elena almost refused. Instead, 40 minutes later, she stood inside Adrian's penthouse, staring through floor-to-ceiling windows at Manhattan's lights. Marble reflected the city in silver streaks. Warm air carried the faint smell of leather and cedar. Adrian sat behind a black walnut desk, sleeves buttoned, posture perfectly still. "You need someone who can stand beside me without attracting attention," he said. Elena glanced at the diamond resting inside a velvet box. "You mean a fake girlfriend?" "Fiancée." The word landed harder. "For 30 days. He explained the arrangement without dressing it up. His public image required stability. Certain business rivals were watching him. A sudden engagement would force them to reconsider their assumptions and make his movements harder to predict. Elena listened with both hands wrapped around the strap of her worn handbag. "And why would a man like you choose a waitress?" Adrian's eyes settled on her. "Because you don't belong to my world." She almost laughed. "That sounds like an insult." "It's a reason I trust the arrangement." He pushed the box across the desk. "You attend dinners. You stand beside me. You let people believe what they already want to believe." Elena looked at the ring, then at the city below. "And if I say no?" "You walk out. No threat. No pressure." That made the decision harder. She thought of the unpaid rent, the stack of envelopes on her kitchen counter, the hours she had been adding to every week just to stay above water. Finally, she reached for the box. The velvet felt cool beneath her fingertips. 30 days, she said. Adrian nodded once. 30 days. But before she could close the box, he added, "There is one condition." Elena stopped. Adrian stood, crossed the polished floor, and placed his hand beside the ring without touching it. "When you are with me, no one gets to treat you like you're beneath them." Elena slowly looked up at him. "And if they do?" His answer was immediate. "Then they answer to me." 3 days later, that promise would be tested in front of armed enemies, and Elena was about to learn that Adrian had never intended their arrangement to remain only an act. Elena arrived at Adrian Moretti's penthouse the following evening carrying the same worn handbag she had taken to work for months, but everything else about her looked different. A black dress waited on the bed, its fabric smooth beneath her fingertips, with a pair of understated diamond earrings beside it. The room smelled faintly of cedar and expensive perfume. City lights spilled through the glass walls, painting silver reflections across the marble floor. She touched the dress, then turned toward Adrian, who stood near the window with his hands in his coat pockets. "I'm a waitress," she said. "I'm not trained for whatever this is." "You don't need training," Adrian replied. "You need to be yourself." Elena gave him a skeptical look. "Yourself doesn't usually cost $12,000. His mouth almost moved into a smile. "Almost. That dress belongs to you." She looked down at it again. "For 30 days? Forever." That stopped her. Adrian crossed the room and placed a small folder on the table. Inside were photographs from upcoming events, charity dinners, business receptions, private gatherings where powerful people would study every movement she made. "They'll ask questions," he said. "How we met, where we live, when we're getting married." Elena folded her arms. "And what do I say? The truth whenever you can. And when I can't." Adrian's gaze held hers. "Say less." She picked up the first photograph. "What about your family? They'll test you. Your friends?" "I don't have many." "Enemies?" Adrian was silent for a moment. "Too many." The words seemed to settle into the room with the weight of the marble beneath her shoes. He then took out a second card, handwritten in dark ink. 3 rules, he said. First, never wander away from me at an event. Second, never accept a drink you didn't see poured. Third, if I tell you we're leaving, you leave. Immediately. Elena read the list twice. Those aren't rules for a fake engagement. They're rules for staying beside me. She slowly handed the card back. "And your 4th rule?" "There isn't one." "There should be." Adrian looked at her. "Then you make it." Elena thought for a moment before taking the pen from his desk. She added one line beneath his 3 rules. "You don't get to treat me like I'm helpless." She returned the card. Adrian read it, then folded it carefully and slipped it into his inner pocket. Agreed. The next morning, Elena entered the Moretti headquarters beside him. The lobby rose 3 stories beneath a chandelier of cut glass, while the polished stone beneath her heels clicked with every step. Conversations softened as they passed. Men in tailored suits looked at Adrian, then at Elena, then back at Adrian. She kept walking. At the elevator, Adrian offered his arm. Elena hesitated only briefly before taking it. The doors opened onto a private floor where several senior members of his organization waited around a long walnut table. One older man looked Elena over and smiled thinly. "So, this is the woman?" Adrian's expression remained calm. "This is my fiancée." Elena felt every pair of eyes turn toward her. She could have lowered her gaze. Instead, she stepped forward, placed her handbag on the table, and met the man's stare. "It's nice to meet you," she said. "I've heard quite a lot about this family." The room went quiet. Adrian turned slightly toward her. For the first time, Elena saw something unmistakable in his eyes. Not amusement, not approval, but respect. Then he offered her his hand in front of everyone. Elena took it. Their arrangement was supposed to convince the world they belonged together. Now Adrian was making sure his entire world understood one thing. No one would be allowed to treat his fake fiancée as if she were beneath him. Elena's first real test as Adrian Moretti's fiancée came that evening beneath the gold chandeliers of the Belladonna Club, where every polished table carried crystal glasses, white roses, and the quiet weight of old money. The dining room smelled of roasted garlic, cedar smoke, and expensive cologne. Elena walked beside Adrian in the black dress he had given her, her fingers resting lightly on his arm as cameras flashed beyond the velvet entrance. She had spent the afternoon practicing names and remembering which fork belonged to which course, but Adrian had told her only one thing before they entered. "Don't perform for them." She glanced at him. "That's literally why I'm here." A faint curve touched his mouth. "Then perform badly." Inside, the conversations softened as Adrian passed. Elena felt eyes follow the simple diamond on her left hand. At the head table sat several people who had known Adrian long before he became the most feared man in the room. They looked at Elena differently. Not as a woman, as a question. Adrian pulled out her chair himself, then took the seat beside her. The gesture was small, but it made the older guests exchange glances. Dinner began quietly. Silverware touched porcelain. Crystal chimed against crystal. Elena answered polite questions about Manhattan, her work, and how she had met Adrian without revealing anything they had agreed to keep private. Then a woman across the table leaned back, studying Elena's hands. "You have a waitress's hands," she said. Elena looked down at her fingers. A tiny burn mark near her thumb had never completely faded from years of carrying hot plates. The woman smiled. "No offense." Adrian set his fork down. The soft click against the china silenced the table. Elena touched his wrist before he could speak. "None taken." She lifted her water glass. "They're useful hands." The woman blinked. Elena continued, her voice calm. "They've carried trays through 12-hour shifts, opened stubborn jars for elderly customers, and held steady when someone else was having a bad day. I don't see why I should be embarrassed by them." Silence settled over the table. Adrian leaned back, watching her. Then the same woman laughed lightly. "You're certainly confident for someone who just entered this world." Elena placed her glass down. "I didn't enter your world. Adrian invited me into his." Adrian's eyes shifted toward her. Something in the room changed. The older man beside the woman cleared his throat and asked Adrian whether he truly intended to marry someone with no family name, no wealth, and no connections. Adrian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached across the table and took Elena's hand. His thumb rested over the diamond ring. "I don't need her family name," he said. "I chose her." The words traveled farther than his voice. Elena turned toward him, caught off guard by the certainty in his tone. Before she could respond, a server approached with the next course. Adrian noticed Elena glance at the crowded room. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I'm learning." "What?" "That being your fake fiancé may be harder than being your real one." His expression softened for half a second. "There's something you should know." Elena looked at him. Adrian's hand remained around hers. Tomorrow night, everyone who matters in my world will be watching us. He paused. And I want you beside me. It wasn't an instruction this time. It sounded like a choice. Elena tightened her fingers around his. Then I'll be there. Adrian nodded, but the look in his eyes told her tomorrow would demand far more than pretending to belong at his side. By the time Elena stepped into the Blacktown car, Adrian had already changed the evening's plan. The leather seats were cool beneath her palms, and the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and polished metal. We're not going to the gala, he said. Elena looked across at him. You just told me everyone important would be there. They will. He glanced at the driver through the partition. We're arriving through the private entrance. She frowned. Why? Adrian loosened his cuff, then looked at the diamond on her finger. Because I don't want you walking through a crowd tonight. Elena folded her hands in her lap. That wasn't one of our rules. I know. The car rolled beneath Manhattan's lights, tires whispering over wet pavement. For several blocks, neither spoke. Then Elena reached into her handbag and pulled out the small card containing their 4 rules. She placed it between them. You said I wasn't helpless. Adrian looked at the card. You're not. Then stop making decisions for me. The words were quiet, but they landed hard. Adrian stared at her for a moment before taking the card. He folded it once and returned it.
Fine.
We go through the front.
Elena nodded.
Thank you. The corner of his mouth lifted. You're difficult. I'm a waitress. Difficult customers are part of the job. A brief silence followed, and this time Adrian actually smiled. It disappeared as quickly as it came, but Elena had seen it. 20 minutes later, the doors of the Harrington Hotel opened beneath a canopy of white lights. Cameras flashed. Music drifted through the marble lobby, mixed with champagne, perfume, and the low murmur of New York's most influential guests. Adrian offered Elena his arm. She took it. Together they crossed the polished floor.
No rehearsal. No script.
Just 2 people moving as though they had done it 100 times. At the ballroom entrance, a photographer stepped forward. Mr. Moretti, one picture with your fiancée. Adrian turned toward Elena. Your choice. Elena smiled and stepped closer. The camera flashed. Adrian's hand settled lightly at her shoulder, careful and respectful. Another flash. Then another. Look this way, someone called. Elena turned, and Adrian instinctively shifted so his body stood between her and the crowded doorway. She noticed. You keep doing that, she whispered. Doing what? Standing in front of me. His eyes stayed on the room. Habit. From what? Adrian finally looked at her. Protecting what matters. Elena's fingers tightened slightly around his arm. The ballroom swallowed them in gold light and orchestral music. Throughout the evening, Adrian remained near her, but something had changed. He no longer corrected how she spoke or where she stood. When someone addressed her directly, he let her answer. When a waiter offered her champagne, Elena checked the bottle before accepting it, and Adrian said nothing. She had learned his rules. He had begun respecting hers. Near midnight, Elena stepped onto the quiet terrace for air. The stone railing was cold beneath her fingertips, and the city below hummed with traffic. Adrian joined her moments later, removing his coat and placing it over her shoulders. You didn't have to do that, she
said.
I know. He stood beside her, leaving space between them. Then his voice dropped. Elena, there's something I haven't told you. She turned. Adrian looked toward the glittering skyline, then back at the woman wearing his ring. When I hired you, I needed a fake fiancé.
He paused.
I don't think that's what I need anymore. Adrian's confession barely left his lips before Elena stepped away from the terrace railing. The stone beneath her heels was cold, and the distant traffic hummed below like a restless current. What are you saying? She asked. Adrian removed his hands from his pockets. I'm saying the arrangement has changed. Without asking me? No, his answer came immediately. I'm asking now. Elena studied his face beneath the soft terrace lights. For once, the man who controlled entire rooms seemed to have no prepared answer. What do you want? She asked. Adrian took one measured step closer, stopping well within her view, but leaving space between them. I want you to stay. She looked at the diamond on her finger. As your fiancé? As Elena. The words hung between them. Then the ballroom doors opened behind them. A security man appeared, his expression tense. Mr. Moretti, we need you inside. Adrian turned.
Why?
Your car is gone.
Elena frowned. Gone.
The man nodded. The driver says someone took the vehicle from the service entrance. Adrian's posture changed instantly. The warmth of the terrace disappeared beneath his controlled silence. He reached for Elena's coat and handed it back to her. We're leaving. She slipped her arms through the sleeves. You said no more decisions for me. Adrian looked at her. This one isn't about control. He offered his hand. It's about getting you home safely. Elena took it. They entered the ballroom together, but this time Adrian didn't walk ahead. He kept Elena beside him as they crossed the crowded floor. Guests continued laughing, unaware that the night had shifted. Then the ballroom doors opened again. Two unfamiliar men stepped inside. Adrian stopped. Elena felt his fingers tighten around hers. One of the men approached slowly, holding a white envelope between two fingers. Mr. Moretti, he said. A message. Adrian didn't take it. Leave. The man looked at Elena. It's for her. Every sound in the ballroom seemed to fall away. Elena stared at the envelope. Her name was written across the front in black ink. How do you know me? She asked. The stranger smiled without warmth. Everyone knows the woman standing beside Adrian Moretti. Adrian moved between them. You have 5 seconds to walk out. The man placed the envelope on a nearby table instead. Tomorrow morning, he said, she will either disappear from your life, or people will learn exactly what she means to you. Then he turned and walked away. Adrian's security team moved immediately, but Adrian raised one hand. Let him go. Elena looked at him.
Why?
Adrian's eyes remained fixed on the envelope. Because this isn't a threat against me. He finally looked at her. It's a warning about you. Elena reached for the envelope before he could stop her. The paper was thick, almost cold against her fingertips. She opened it. Inside was a single photograph of herself leaving the restaurant where she had worked for years. Taken that afternoon. Elena's hand lowered slowly. They've been watching me. Adrian stepped closer. Yes. Since when? He didn't answer. Instead, he took the photograph from her hand and folded it carefully. You're not going back to that apartment tonight. Elena stared at him. Where am I going? Adrian held her gaze. With me. This time, it wasn't an offer wrapped in a contract. It was a decision, and before Elena could answer, Adrian's security team closed every entrance to the building. The doors had barely locked when Adrian took Elena through a private corridor beneath the hotel, his hand steady at the small of her back, without pulling her closer than necessary. The hallway smelled of polished stone and fresh linen, while recessed lights cast narrow bands of gold across the floor. Elena kept pace beside him, still holding the photograph from the envelope. You said they were watching me, she said. Yes. And you knew they might come after me? Adrian stopped beside a steel elevator. The machinery hummed behind the walls. I knew there was a possibility. Elena looked at him sharply. You knew, and you still brought me into that ballroom. Adrian pressed the elevator button. Because hiding you would have confirmed exactly what they suspected. The doors opened with a soft chime. Inside, brushed steel reflected their faces in muted fragments. Elena stepped in first. Adrian followed. So, I was part of your strategy. At first, the elevator descended. Elena watched the floor numbers disappear. And now, Adrian looked directly at her. Now you're the reason the strategy doesn't matter anymore. The doors opened beneath the building into a private garage. A black SUV waited under fluorescent lights, its engine already running. Cold air swept through the concrete space, carrying the smell of gasoline and rain-soaked pavement. Adrian opened the rear door for Elena. Get in. She didn't move. You said I had a choice. You do. Then tell me where we're going. My house. She folded her arms. The penthouse. No, his voice lowered. My private residence outside the city. Elena looked toward the waiting vehicle. And what happens when we get there? You sleep.
You eat.
You stay somewhere they can't reach you. And you. I'll handle everything else. Elena stepped closer instead of getting into the car. That's the problem, Adrian. You keep saying you'll handle everything else. She held up the photograph. This started because I agreed to pretend to be your fiancé. I can understand being protected. I can't understand being kept in the dark. Adrian's jaw tightened. Then he did something she had not expected. He took off his watch and placed it on the hood of the SUV, as though removing one more barrier between them. You're right. Elena said nothing. I should have told you what the arrangement could cost. He looked toward the empty garage. I thought keeping you uninformed would keep you safer. It didn't. No, his voice was quiet. It made you vulnerable. Elena lowered the photograph. For several seconds, only the engine and distant rain filled the garage. Then Adrian reached into his coat and handed her a second document. Not a clue, not a secret, but the contract she had signed 3 days earlier. He tore it cleanly down the middle. Then again. Elena stared at the pieces in his palm. What are you doing? Ending the agreement. He let the torn pages fall into the trash bin. You don't owe me 30 days. Elena looked at the diamond on her finger. And the ring. Adrian's gaze settled on it. Keep it if you want. She touched the stone, then looked back at him. Why? He answered without hesitation. Because tonight, when those men came for you, I realized I couldn't keep pretending you were just part of a plan. Elena stepped into the SUV. Adrian closed the door gently. For the first time since their arrangement began, the contract was gone. But the ring remained. And Adrian had just made one decision that could put everything he had built at risk. He would protect Elena even if it meant standing against his own world. The private residence stood beyond a long iron gate, surrounded by dark trees and stone walls, but Elena barely had time to notice the quiet before headlights appeared at the end of the driveway. The SUV stopped beneath the covered entrance, its tires crunching over wet gravel. Adrian stepped out first. Cold air slipped beneath Elena's coat, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Then the security lights snapped on. 3 vehicles were approaching the gate. Adrian turned toward Elena. Inside.
Now.
Elena stayed beside him. You said the contract was over. It is. Then stop ordering me around. Adrian looked at her, then toward the approaching headlights. This isn't a game anymore. The gate began to close, metal grinding against metal. One of the approaching vehicles accelerated. Adrian reached for Elena's hand and pulled her toward the stone entrance. She moved with him, but stopped before the doors. Wait. Adrian turned. What? Elena pointed toward the driveway. They're not trying to get through the gate. The first vehicle stopped. The rear door opened. A man stepped out holding both hands where they could be seen. He wore the same dark overcoat as the stranger at the hotel. Adrian Moretti, he called across the wet pavement. We know she's here. Adrian's shoulders went rigid. Stay behind me. Elena shook her head. No. She stepped forward. Adrian caught her wrist. She looked at his hand until he released it. You told me nobody gets to treat me like I'm helpless. She walked down the first stone step. I'm not going to start now. Adrian followed, but she raised one hand. Stay there. For a moment, the most powerful man in the driveway actually stopped. Elena continued until the porch light illuminated her face. The man by the vehicle stared at her. You have no idea what you've stepped into. Elena glanced at the diamond on her finger. I know exactly what I stepped into. Then give us Moretti. Adrian moved forward. That's enough. Elena turned toward him. No, her voice carried through the cold air. Let me answer. She faced the men again. You came to this house because you think Adrian's weakness is standing in front of you. The man smiled. Isn't it? Elena slowly removed the diamond ring. Adrian's eyes followed the movement. She held it between her fingers, then placed it on the stone railing. You're wrong. The man's smile faded. Then what is she? Adrian answered this time. The person I chose. Elena looked at him. And that's why you came here, isn't it? The man said nothing. She stepped back toward Adrian. You expected me to run. You expected him to hide me. You expected your pressure to turn us against each other. She shook her head. But you made one mistake. Adrian looked at her. What mistake? Elena picked up the ring and slipped it back onto her finger. You assumed a poor waitress wouldn't understand how people behave when they think they're more important than everyone else. Silence settled over the driveway. The man's expression changed. Elena had no weapon, no army, no fortune. She had only the same composure that had carried her through crowded restaurant floors and impossible customers. Adrian moved beside her, not in front of her. The gates locked with a heavy metallic click behind the waiting vehicles. Then the security lights illuminated every man standing outside. Adrian looked at Elena, and something shifted between them. She was no longer someone he needed to hide. She was standing beside him by choice.
Tell
them, Elena said quietly. Tell them who I am. Adrian looked toward the men at the gate. She's not my weakness. He reached for Elena's hand. She's the reason you just lost your advantage. The rain had stopped by sunrise, leaving the stone driveway silver beneath the pale morning light. Elena stood beside Adrian at the tall windows of his private residence, the diamond ring catching a thin stripe of sunlight as she watched the last black vehicle disappear beyond the gates. The house smelled of fresh coffee and cedar, and somewhere behind them a clock ticked steadily through the silence. Adrian set 2 cups on the table. It's over, he said. Elena turned. The men outside? They won't come back. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents showing that the people who had threatened them had withdrawn from the conflict, their pressure against Adrian's organization finished after his refusal to surrender Elena. She closed the folder. And me. Adrian looked at her. You're free. He reached into his jacket and placed the original engagement agreement beside the folder. No contract.
No obligación.
No 30-day deadline. Elena looked at the papers, then at him. So that's it. Adrian nodded once. If you want it to be. She picked up the agreement and tore it in half herself. The sound was small in the quiet room. Good. Adrian watched the pieces fall onto the table. Good.
Elena smiled faintly.
I didn't like that contract. For the first time in days. Adrian laughed under his breath. It was brief, unfamiliar, almost softer than his usual voice. Elena walked toward the kitchen, but Adrian stopped her with a question. What will you do now? She turned. Go back to work, probably. His expression tightened. You don't have to. I know. She looked around the enormous room, at the marble counters and dark wood cabinets, then back at him. But I want a life that belongs to me. Adrian nodded. Then build it. She studied him for a moment. And what about you? He glanced toward the city, beyond the glass. I'll keep running my business. Elena raised an eyebrow. Your business? The legitimate parts of it, mostly. Mostly? A small smile appeared. I'm still Adrian Moretti. She laughed, and the sound softened the room more effectively than the morning sunlight. Later that afternoon, Adrian drove her back to Manhattan himself. The familiar streets passed outside the windows, yellow taxis moving between delivery trucks and buses. When they stopped outside her apartment, Elena reached for the door handle. Thank you, she said. Adrian looked at her. For what? For letting me choose. She stepped out, then paused on the sidewalk. You know, Adrian, you never actually asked me to stay. He lowered the window. I thought I had. You didn't. He stared at her for a moment, then parked and stepped onto the sidewalk. The city noise rolled around them, horns and footsteps mixing with the smell of coffee from the corner shop. Adrian stood before her without guards, without a contract, without the authority that usually made people lower their eyes. Elena Brooks, he said, will you stay with me because you want to? She looked at the man who had once hired her because a poor waitress could disappear into his world, then looked at the diamond still resting on her finger. Yes. Adrian exhaled slowly. He didn't reach for her until she offered her hand first. Months later, Elena would no longer be introduced as a waitress pretending to be Adrian Moretti's fiancée. She would stand beside him by choice, building a life neither of them had expected. And the ring that began as part of a lie became the quiet promise of something neither power nor poverty could take away. 2 people choosing each other freely, and discovering that dignity was never about the world you came from. It was about the way you chose to stand in it.